Hey there, truth seekers. Welcome to Star Kittens Media, where we discuss 13 sign astrology. We are sharing our interview that we did a few weeks ago with Liz from Liz Tarot, where she asked us questions about 13 sign astrology, how we found it, and what it means moving forward. Enjoy this enlightening conversation we had, and let us know in the comments what resonated with you.
Well, hey, Tarot loves, it's Liz. I'm back, and I wanted to introduce my new friends, David and Sana from New Zealand. These folks are experts in 13 sign astrology, and I've just gotten to know them recently, and I'm so fascinated with this new system. I'm more familiar with Western style astrology, and I've had a Vedic astrology read too. So I wanted to just begin to ask you guys questions. How are you doing today?
Really good.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
So great. Yeah, so I'll start off with the first question I have for you is, can you tell us briefly, how did you both get into 13 sign astrology?
I'll let David take the lead.
I love the laugh.
So, a little bit of a backstory. I am in that Gen X generation that is generally known in the kind of spiritual world as the indigos, the first indigos that came in. There are indigo children, but there are actually Gen Xs or indigos. They call us indigo warriors, right? So we were born at a very, very interesting time astrologically in the mid-60s, a lot of us. Between 64 and 67, there was a once in a probably forever conjunction between Pluto, who else? There was Uranus, there was Mars, and opposite was sitting Saturn conjunct Chiron. So this particular configuration probably will never be repeated again, certainly in our lifetimes, just because of the movement of all of the planets. So there was a bunch of us that, as higher selves, this is our belief, that we came in at that particular time, particularly in the 60s as kids, and in the generational structure we're called the Gen Xers. So I just thought I'd put that in there because that leads to how I got to 13 sign astrology. Then around age 11, literally, so we're talking about 75, 76, 77, where there's no internet, there's no cell phones, there's nothing. To learn, you have to read books. So I had what I would now look back on and say was a spontaneous spiritual awakening, where I suddenly found myself just in this incredibly euphoric state, which I now recognize as a partial Kundalini awakening. It just happened spontaneously. And up to that point, I had always been very intuitive as a child. A lot of those ESP type faculties were clairvoyance, clairaudience were already there very, very strongly. So because I had this at 11, I started to look into different modalities such as astrology, tarot, numerology, anything really in that divination space that would help me make sense of what was going on. So I came into a family that was not particularly spiritual. They were religious in terms of they had a belief in God, but it was never anything that, we sat around the dinner table talking about. So as I had this experience, I had two brothers as well who didn't have that. I felt somewhat isolated, somewhat alone, a little bit of like, what on earth is going on? I was seeing visions. I would be able to look at situations. We were sitting around and talking at the dinner table, and parents would ask about something, and I'd go, there's the answer. And they'd go, how did you arrive at that? It was just that I had these faculties already online. And, when you then play it forward, many, many years into my 40s and 50s, I realized that what was happening actually was that I was having this partial sort of Kundalini awakening. So in other words, I was becoming much more aware of these spiritual practices, especially part of which was astrology. So my background from 11 onwards, literally, again, the context, no cell phones, no distractions. The TV used to go off at 6 o'clock at night. There was no evening television here in New Zealand at the time. So I was very curious and began to read and read and read and read for years. And so I read all of the big books that were out at the time about 12 sign astrology. In those days, there was no computer charts. You had to cast your own chart using mathematical calculations. So it was quite a laborious process. So I worked out that I was a Scorpio sun under that 12 sign system, a Gemini rising, and a Sagittarius moon. That was under the 12 sign system. We then play it forward for that's 12 to say 20. I did that investigation. So I spent about maybe 8 years reading and learning everything I possibly could about astrology. Again, not from the internet, from books. And I think that there's a different process that goes on in one's mind when you are reading as opposed to watching or listening. You're having to use different parts of the brain to absorb. It's also a much slower process of learning. So I felt that I had a very strong grounding in 12 sign astrology. I also realized that with the Scorpio sun, Sagittarius moon, and Gemini rising, that I had the 3 different modalities working. Of course, I had a air rising sign or ascendant, I had a fire moon, and I had a water sun. So when you take air, water, and fire, what I call now the golden triangle of expression, of personal expression, it's almost impossible to bring those 3 modalities together in a cohesive manner. It's very difficult to do. So in other words, my heart's going in one direction, my personality's going in another direction, and my head, my intellect's going in a third direction. So that began to create for me a lot of questions about, this doesn't make sense. I was already buying into the idea that as higher self, I chose to come in at that time, and I chose that configuration. I chose the exact moment of birth, which was 7:32 p.m. in what was then Rhodesia, now Zambia. And there was an incredible amount of questions that were being raised for me. And it took me from 20 to about 45, so another 25 years of struggling with that 12 sign configuration, when I finally stumbled across Lisa Renee's material. And she has done an amazing amount of research on a lot of different topics. If you're not familiar with her, she's all over the internet. She has the Wikipedia of spirituality. Basically anything that you would ever possibly imagine is in there. So I, of course, looked up her views on astrology, and I stumbled across this 13th sign, which is Ophiuchus. And that led me to then, of course, we now have computer charts. So I was able to recast my chart, and I was like, oh my goodness, I'm not actually a Gemini rising, I'm a Taurus rising, which is an earth sign. I'm not a Scorpio sun, I'm actually a Libra sun. And I'm not a Sagittarius moon, I'm actually an Ophiuchus moon. So I was like, oh my goodness, I felt like at that moment, it's hard to describe, and Sana will talk about this as well. I just felt like, wow, suddenly everything that I've been learning up to that point, you've got to realize this was from 11 right through to about 45. So we're talking 30 something years. I realized that system, whilst it had some truth to it, and certainly had, there's a lot of crossover between the 2 systems, it never felt right to me. But the Ophiuchus moon, the more I read about it, particularly in the way that I emotionally and creatively deal with life, that was all Ophiuchus. Now, without taking too much more time, what I quickly say about Ophiuchus is that I have spent a lifetime in business, and this is an important context for the way that I see the world, which is that I am quite strongly left-brained, which is typically male, but I also have a lot of right-brain faculties, as I described before. But my tendency is to be a little skeptical. And so I like to test and, theorize and put things to the, into the fires of what else is out there. I try to actually, if I discover something like that, like Ophiuchus, I was like, what information is out there on the internet? What information is out there in the world that would debunk this? I mean, we'll talk about that a little later. And I went through a long process. And what I stumbled across was that the sun, as it moves through its ecliptic, the sun clearly moves, our perspective of the sun moves, and it moves through all of these different constellations. Well, NASA came out with a tweet and a blog, which was hugely, it was picked up by the mainstream media at the time. This is still on the internet. All the big media channels ran the story and said, NASA has now said that Ophiuchus is part of the sun's ecliptic. So in other words, the sun spends time in this constellation. And, from a scientific point of view, it's preposterous to think that Ophiuchus constellation wasn't ever there. It was always there. Obviously, it was always there. But the sun moving through there brings a different perspective when you then look at astrology, because, this is the last piece I'll say about this, and we can explore this a little bit later, but the 12 sign system is what they call the Ptolemaic system. So it was developed and designed by Claudius Ptolemy, a historical figure who, in the times of the Greco-Roman Empire, devised the 12 sign system. And we know that the Greco-Roman Empire was very scientific. It was very left-brained. It was very patriarchal. And the idea that the source consciousness or the universal intelligence, or whatever word you use to describe your relationship with the, God consciousness, whatever it is, to me, my own personal interpretation of it was that it is inconceivable that a system could be developed by source itself. In other words, us understanding the movement of the constellations and what that can mean for us as archetypes. It's inconceivable that the sun would only spend 30 days in a nice, neat circle around the ecliptic, and it spends 30 days in each sign. And therefore, 12 signs, 30 degrees, 1 degree is 1 day, 30 days, you come up with 360 days, more or less, you come up with 12 months. So the science behind it was a little funky, to be honest, was my research. And I thought, well, that doesn't match up with my understanding of source, which is about diversity. You look at the genetics in humanity, you look everywhere, there's diversity. And how could it be that this system was just so succinct and so precise? And of course, when I researched that, it then came back to the fact that this was designed by the Roman Empire, or Ptolemy, who was an advisor to the state, again, a historical figure. You can look all of this up. And he inserted actually Libra to make the 12 sign astrology work, because it didn't work. Now, there's a whole lot of other stuff we can talk about, which may or may not come up today, about why Ophiuchus was removed. And it's to do with the divine feminine, and the name Ophiuchus changed to Asclepius. Asclepius is the father of medicine, and the rod and staff caduceus symbol was hijacked, in my opinion, by the Romans at that time. That whole symbology went from Ophiuchus, which is actually the rising of the Kundalini and the snake, up the rod of the spine. That's the awakening process. That caduceus symbol is now associated with Asclepius rather than Ophiuchus.
And with
Asclepius,
science, right? And when science took it over, yes.
Yeah, and the male personification of this divine feminine energy was basically ripped apart, or the feminine was transposed into a masculine expression. So that is also a big part of why I think that 13, which is obviously relating to the feminine energy, was removed, because it just was so inconsistent with the patriarchal worldview that Ptolemy and the Romans had at the time. We know that the Roman Empire is the basis or the root of Western thinking, whether it's philosophy, whether it's science, whether it's politics, whether it's social theories, medicine, technology. It's all come out of that Roman, epoch, if you like. So that's how I came to an understanding of it. And I'll leave it there, and because Sana's got obviously a different pathway, which is again just as fascinating.
David, that's great. That's just brilliant. I love hearing about your journey because it's often in our early 40s, isn't it, where we have our own personal awakening. So your own hero's journey led you there when you're ready to take on the mantle, and take on your hero's journey. And now you have a tribe around you. In other words, Sana as well, probably as other people. Thank you so much. Sana, how about you?
Well, astrology has been part of my upbringing. Always it was actually my paternal grandfather that was already into astrology. So, a man from the early 1910s, 1920s found his way to that. He used a 12 sign system, as the majority of the people on the planet do. But because of that, my mum always used it as well. I remember as a child that she had the charts computer generated already at that stage. And my auntie, so the sister of my mum, is actually a professional astrologer. That's how she earns her living, using 12 sign astrology. And so I grew up believing that my sun was in Libra, that my rising sign was Sagittarius, and that my moon was in Cancer. And so the Sagittarius, once I moved to New Zealand, that was my travel, my outdoors, I made it fit. And the Libra being the, always weighing off and being kind, my interpretation of Libra at that time. And I am a mother of 2 children, and I thought my daughter was a Taurus because of when she was born, and my son would be a Leo with his sun in Leo. And so again, I made it fit how a lot of people do that. You kind of feel that it's not quite right, but that may be some other aspect of my chart. And there was one of the early conversations that David and I had over the phone. And I asked him, so when is your birthday? And he said, the 14th of November. So I'm like, so you're a Scorpio. And he went, no, I'm a Libra. I'm like, like what? But 14th of November is Scorpio. He said, no, it's under the 13th sign. It is Libra. And I was like, what does then mean for me thinking I was a Libra? And I remember so clearly, he said, are you sure you want to know? Because it can be life-changing. And I wanted to know. And he drew up my chart using a website. And yes, my sun is in Virgo, my rising sign is Scorpio, and my moon is in Gemini. And yeah, just that sense of coming home of, now I understand how when I do go through a sad part, that depth that we can go into, and I just keep going down, I'm like, that's the Scorpio energy in me. That's in my managerial, my, coordination and managing, that's my Virgo, it's like, that
I know
makes
your
sense.
Virgo side. I know your Virgo side.
Yeah. And so it was just fascinating. And the other thing that I really appreciate of being introduced to this new form of astrology to me is the use of some of the fixed stars, including Arcturus and Sirius. And Sirius is one of those ones that can also have quite a bad rep. But everything we can use light and dark, and we see Sirius as the Sirian energy, the science energy, that the looking at things in a scientific way, and the Arcturus energy is the healers of the universe. I was going to say of the world, but of the universe. And I have Arcturus star on my sun, and I have Sirius on my moon. And that has given me permission to tap into the healing abilities that I have. It's like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense now. And I'll just tell you one more little story that I had with my mum. So my mum, as I said, has been in astrology her whole life. And at that time she was 68, that we had this conversation. And I was going through a difficult part of my life. And she said, oh, I think that is because Uranus is making a transit with blah, 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 blah. And I looked at her and I was like, oh my gosh, here's this woman that's been using 12 sign astrology for the last 68 years. How am I going to say that I do not subscribe to that anymore? How do I say that? And so I said, Mum, I don't believe that anymore. And she kind of looked at me. She said, what do you mean? I'm like, I now believe in 13 sign astrology, the true position of the planetary bodies in the zodiac. And she looked at me, she said, what do you mean? I'm like, well, my sun is in Virgo. And she, what? What? And she said, can you do mine? And so she lived her life really trying to fit her life. And I'm sure she doesn't mind me sharing. She made her life fit to be a sun in Pisces and Gemini rising and Taurus moon. She made it fit. And she, she was like, oh, my knee is this, and my ability to quick think is my this. So she made it really fit, but it really didn't feel right. And so when I drew up her chart, and it turned out that she had her sun in Aquarius and her moon in Aries, that fiery emotional tendencies that she clearly has had her whole life. It was almost like she dropped 10 pounds. She was like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. And in the 3 years that she now uses this knowledge, she's able to understand her actions, the way that she sees the world, the way she interacts with people so much more. And it's been so liberating. And also to understand my children, going from my son thinking he was a Leo, a fiery individual, to being Cancer. He's actually a triple water. He has his sun and moon in Cancer, and his rising sign is in Pisces. And he is the most intuitive, emotional soul that I have in my life. And then to think that if we wouldn't be using this, we would be like, oh no, but he's a Leo, you trying to then push him into that way. And I think that is the biggest crime when it comes to astrology, and even to some respect tarot, and you and David will know more about that. But the people who use these modalities to understand the lifetime that we've chosen. We are hoping to live up to our divine design for this lifetime. And so we use 12 sign astrology thinking, so this is my path. This will make me do better, get me closer to my end goal. But they've got the wrong recipe book, right? Because they changed it, and for whatever reason they changed it. And so I think it is such a shame that people think that they are on the right path, but if only they knew that they have the wrong recipe book for this lifetime, and if they would be willing to and be open to seeing it differently, I think the whole of humanity would be able to accelerate to the restoration of this planet a lot faster.
I love these stories, and I love that your mom was so open and she didn't just shut you down. That's her cup half empty, right? As we talk about, I think that's beautiful. I love these stories. And so what I'm hearing from both of you is that if you have a sign and you find that you have in your life, like I've been trying to do with Taurus, I thought I was on the cusp between Aries and Taurus. I'm like, where's the Taurus part of me? I must want to be a homebody, but I don't feel like it anyway. So anyway, I see that if you have found that in your astrological chart in the Western system, you haven't been fitting, you've been trying to force a fit, that actually looking into the 13th sign of Ophiuchus could ease up and make just where you really feel like you're home. is what I'm hearing. Yeah.
It can go a different way as well, Liz. You know, we have the Western astrology has really, from what I have experienced, you know, I haven't studied astrology for years. I've used it pretty much my whole life, but I don't have the knowledge that David and others have. But Gemini is seen in the Western world as this fun-loving, flitting, you know, this kind of yay sign. Same as Leo. Leo is the pride. You know, look at me. And so some people, they believe that they are this Leo. For example, Lionsgate 8/8, on that day, the sun is actually in Cancer. And so they're like, oh, I'm this Leo. And then they do a 13 sign astrology reading, or they get their chart and it turns out that their sun is actually in Cancer. They don't want to know it because Leo is way better than Cancer. But
Yep.
what's actually happening is that they are denying part of their destiny, because if they would truly step into that Cancer energy, they might get that family that they always yearned. You know, Cancer is that family orientation, the home sign of the moon, or, you know, Gemini, that flitting, and it's the fun loving. But if they would actually realize that they were Taurus, they might get that house that they always wanted, those earthly possessions that they actually deep down crave, but it's way more fun to be the Gemini. So it can go both ways, even though you think you are settled into that energy, that because of what you think that energy is, you could very much be denying your true destiny for this lifetime by not embracing.
I like that.
Because if you use your apps, there are so many apps now on that you look at the sky and you can clearly see that the sun right now is in Pisces, you know, and it so often happens that you look and the sun is in this, and all you have to do is just hold your phone and you're like, no, the sun is not there. The sun is in something else, and it's a crime.
Oh, yeah. You know what? I'm also hearing, I do mindset work and I help people feel better with the coaching and stuff that I do in the mindset work. And I would say too, that I can see that you think you're a Leo because it's a sexy sign, but you feel like you're not matching up to Leo. You can feel a sense of disappointment in yourself, and it could cause personal harm. Like, I'm not the Leo I'm supposed to be, or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Well, that's great. The next question I would have is, you've kind of been addressing it, but you've kind of said it, but is there anything you want to add to this concept of why is this good for us to move? You pretty much said it, but anything else you want to add to why 13 sign? Why is it good for us? You've kind of said it, but anything else, any other ideas you want to add to it, to making that switch?
Yeah, look, we're going to have different perspectives on this, but that's okay as well. So from I'm kind of a big picture guy, and, you know, or person. That's my personality. I like to see the big picture and then the small. So some people like the detail, and they'll go from the detail and they'll sort of work their way up to a big picture, whereas others will start with a big picture and will come down into the detail. And you talk about mindset, Liz, you know, that's what they call inductive and deductive, you know, learning, or you can deduct something, you can reduce it down, or you can build it up to get an understanding or a picture. And so from that basis, and as you know, and building on what I said before about the roots of the Western system that we're living in, what many of us call the matrix system, which actually is not a thing in the East, and that's a whole different topic which we'll get to in a bit. But if we accept that those of us in the West are living in a system that was created from predominantly a left brain paradigm, a scientific paradigm, a white coat paradigm, that everything needs to be proven and mathematical and clinical and statistical, that is the world that we live in. It's everywhere. You know, the decisions that are made across any subject you can care to name pretty much will come back to statistics, data, left hand, where's the proof, right? So I believe, or we believe, that system, part of the re-emergence of the divine feminine energy, is to disrupt that. You know, my take on the whole idea of the age of Pisces, which is the patriarchal, top-down, masculine rule, man at the top. You know, it's the pyramid. We all understand that, where there's a few people making the decisions for the many. That's a patriarchal system. We see that, you know, I'll say some things which will be controversial, but we see that in the church. We see that in the CEO running a big business. We see that in a government or a politician or a head of state. We see that whole ideology of a top-down patriarchal, what many call the age of Pisces. We see it everywhere. We see it manifest in systems. We see it manifest in structures. We see it manifest anywhere you care to look. Pretty much will be about the expert or the man. Usually it's a man. But then if we accept that that system in the age of Aquarius is coming to an end, and this is going to be multiple generations of a transition from one system to the next. If we accept that that system is beginning to crumble, and part of that means that you're moving out of a left brain modality, a predominant focus on the left brain, everything needs to be proven, everything needs to be boiled down to, you know, a fact, a factoid, for example, as opposed to the age of Aquarius, which is much more collaborative. It's much more right brain. It's much more intuitive. You're actually engaging a different aspect of our reality. So for us, part of the manifestation of the collapse of, you know, the system, in this case, astrological system, part of that is the emergence of this 13th sign, which has always been there. You know, there's no question, as I said before, the sun spends time in Ophiuchus. That is not a debate. That is a fact. So the reality of whether we choose to cast a chart that would help us interpret, if I've got my moon or my Saturn or my sun or my rising sign or whatever, my south node, whatever it is sitting in Ophiuchus, why would I not want to experience that energy in my life? And that's been my premise for exploring it, and, you know, ultimately setting up Star Kittens Media, which is in its very early stages. But we've cast many charts and done readings, and just to build on what we were saying before about people making things fit, I've got two very close, well, no, in fact, three close female friends that I've done charts for. And two of them, one of them is actually a Cancer sun, but she believes that she is a Leo. And she is yearning to be a mother. And yet she's full on investing in, you know, she loves astrology, but she's absolutely investing in the Leo energy. So what's happening is that she's sending what I would consider a vibrational ripple into the field that's actually working against what we would call her divine design. So the premise being that as higher self, you don't have to accept this, but we accept that as higher self on the other side, before we came in, we sat there and I want to come in as this, or I want to come into that family, or I want to come into that genetic line, or I want to experience this, that, or the next thing. And we have that choice. That's what we believe. Now, whether that is true or not for others, it doesn't matter. It's true for me, and it's true for Sana. So if we accept that we chose a particular time, place, spot on the world, on this earthly structure, which then generates this chart, if we are playing a role in this case, it's just so much fun to be the creative Leo, but yet deep down, I want to be a mum, and yet there's these divergent energies going out. There's a dissonant and a resonant energy. And when you come back to this idea of quantum manifestation, which we also believe in, is that you've got to have coherence. So the why of the 13 chart is that it's not going to fit. It's going to intuitively fit for some, and for others, they'll have an absolute meltdown. Their brain will just go, no, I don't want to know. And you talk about the mindset. Well, remember that I had that meltdown. Yeah, I had to go through that process of undoing 25 to 30 years of knowledge. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is like, I can either just have a complete breakdown because I thought I was right about all of this stuff, or I can be open to accepting that actually my path is different and this is much more resonant. And I can say absolutely 100% that since I embraced that Ophiuchus moon energy, that Libra sun energy, and that Taurus rising energy, my life took a fantastic turn up in every way that I can possibly imagine. Physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, opportunities in the business, everything shifted. But it took a shift in mindset. But that mindset came back to understanding that on a macro, the big picture is that the whole Western world is dealing with this right now. There are questions being asked about all sorts of belief structures that are the basis of what we consider our reality, quantum creation and quantum physics being the latest. We're going from a 0 and 1s computer world, which we've had since the 50s and 60s, to a quantum computing system. Well, that alone is causing all sorts of problems in the field for people. They just can't, we're seeing everywhere, and it's not the time or the place to go into this, but you know what I mean. It's like,
Yes.
this in what we experience individually, in my opinion, is actually a reflection of what's going on in the big picture in the field. So as I had to come up and confront these belief structures, which is actually the, in astrology, the beliefs are along the Gemini Sagittarius polarity, right? And there's a whole piece there, but the beliefs that we have established in childhood, because we were influenced by our peers, by television or media, as modern kids are today, by our parents, whatever, that is all to do with the third house of Gemini. And that's why we call it the house of communication and content. That content that we build our beliefs on actually goes back to childhood. So when we come up to these points in our life, as I did, and as Sana has experienced with her mother and so on, there's a point where you're jutting up against your beliefs. And astrology gives you some sort of way of interpreting that and saying, actually, what happened in how does my third house look? Because my third house is to do with all those experiences I had as a child of where I learned to communicate and I developed the content, in other words, that builds my beliefs. So you have to almost go back to that third house and say, well, hey, hang on. There's always a lot going on in there, even if it's an empty house. The reality is that this idea of why 13 sign is because it helped me, my personal experience, to take that quantum leap to another reality. We haven't talked about all the asteroids like Pallas Athena that are related to the divine feminine, Sedna, which is related to the divine feminine. There's Vesta related to the divine feminine. There's Ceres related to the divine feminine. There's a whole bunch of asteroids which were discovered post the Greco-Roman times. And all of that is actually what I call the fifth and sixth dimensional thinking, which we're all trying to get through. But we need to break through these barriers. And part of it is 13 sign astrology, in our opinion.
I love that. So before Sana, I'm going to invite you to add to that. I love that because as the cabal structures and the matrix structures, as you're saying, are beginning to dissolve, Sana and I talk about this, like how the cognitive dissonance out there, people may be losing their gall darn minds out there. So, so I appreciate you reminding us of that. But this is a great way to move into the Aquarian world, isn't it? Thank you so much. Sana, anything to add to that?
No, I don't think.
No, it was very complete, but we love you, so I wanted to hear what you had to say. So, I mean, you David and Sana, you've mentioned this too a little bit. You've hit on it, but when I was researching this before our interview, because I'm kind of an astrology rube, you tarot people out there are going to be freaked, but it's like I don't use a lot of astrology in my own tarot. I feel it's useful, fun, but I don't find it thoroughly necessary. Every card has a astrological sign, but I get plenty looking at the cards, bouncing into my own intuition. But anyway, it is a gap for me per se. I saw a lot of videos out there kind of debunking it a little bit. And probably due to that cognitive dissonance, and it's a breakdown of someone's entire astrological world. But do you have anything else to add about the debunkers out there?
Before I let David take over, as I said earlier, my aunt, it's her job. She is an astrologer.
Yeah.
And when David and I found each other, and I told her, because she continued to send me some stuff and her blog and her website, and I said, thank you, I appreciate what you're doing, but I am now living by the 13th sign astrology, and include Ophiuchus in my life. And her and I have not spoken since then.
An astrological family breakup. I've never heard of that before.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, you know, whether it is people just don't know better, whether they are just so stubborn, whether they, you know, like David said, they don't want to acknowledge because it would change their mind. Their cups are full for whatever reason. And it breaks their, you know, it's saying to a child, Santa Claus doesn't exist. And you know, that's up to them to sort it out in their lives, and they might never get what they truly desire. And in the example that David say, this woman might never get the family that she so desperately wants. But Ophiuchus, for us, it's a definite feminine energy. She is in the night sky, and the planets and the sun move through her. That's my, as David said earlier, it is ridiculous to have this perfect circle of 360 degrees and it is divided equally in 12 portions. If you look at the way the constellations are, Virgo is like this big.
Yeah.
And Scorpio is this big. But supposedly the sun takes 30 days to travel through both. But using 13 sign charts, the sun takes 45 days to go through Virgo and only 7 to go through Scorpio. And it's such a different way. But anyway, David, why are they debunking the existence of Ophiuchus?
I love this question. So I'll come at it from a couple of angles. I'll come at it from firstly maybe a sort of quasi-scientific perspective, and then come at it from a spiritual perspective as well. So as I said before, you know, I am skeptical. You know, that's my mindset. I'm skeptical about politics. I'm skeptical about economics. I'm skeptical about all of it, right? But at the same time, you know, I don't just sit there and take a position and go, oh, I don't like something. The more I am resistant to an idea or a concept, the more I'll push into it to actually get to the bottom of it. So that's also important sort of framing, if you like, for what I'll say here. I am a believer that, you know, what we are seeing in the matrix is running parallel to what's actually going on in the organic reality. So the organic reality is source intelligence, is you know, we have multiple terms, but sometimes in our blogs we call it the universal intelligence. We, you know, we move between source and we really say God, but it's all the same thing. You know, we won't get hung up on the semantics of the words we use, but this idea of, again, a masculine only divine or universal intelligence, that it's only masculine, to me is completely wrong. It doesn't fit, it doesn't work, it doesn't, nowhere do we see just a masculine energy. So the idea that, so that raises a question is, you know, in some of the Eastern mythologies, they're quite happy to acknowledge, you know, Vedics acknowledge a masculine godhead and a feminine godhead. And the feminine godhead over there in the Eastern, which actually predates anything we did in the West, is much, much older. They've always recognized that there is a feminine presence. You know, some call it the womb of creation. And if you look at the idea of how the masculine and the feminine interact, if the masculine is considered the primordial spark, which is Aries, and the feminine is considered to be, you know, the receipt of that, and it's, you can't have life without feminine energy. So the idea of dismissing feminine out of astrology just doesn't intuitively straight away doesn't make sense. However, it's interesting too, as I said before, I touched on what's happening in the matrix with technology and what's happening organically. And I think that there's a very interesting crossover here. And I'll use cell phones and you know, broadband technology as a metaphor for what I think we're missing perhaps with this whole thing of the divine feminine is re-emerging. Over here on the technological side, we all know about 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, now 6G, right? So technology's moving up, and I think that at the same time, part of that cognitive dissonance you talk about is many of us are operating with a 2G or 3G, you know, kit set, if you like, a part of our operating system or our mental processes is locked in a 3G world, right? This would be a phone that you're trying to run modern streaming like this on a 3G. It just doesn't work. So the idea is technology is actually making these leaps. And in quantum science, there's a very interesting thing going on to do with the theory of relativity. You see, ether, spelled A-E-T-H-E-R, if you type this into the internet and go ether in quantum physics, what you now see is that going back, and this is this debunking of the feminine, going back, ether, which is Ophiuchus. Ophiuchus is ether. So the astrological signs all fall into either fire, which is Aries, or earth, Taurus, air, Gemini, and so on, and water, Scorpio, Cancer, Pisces. But there's a fifth element. That fifth element is ether. And it's the fifth element is the unifying structure that allows all those other modalities of fire, earth, water, and air to actually function. So in quantum science, they call that unifying field ether. A-E-T-H-E-R. So that's really interesting.
The field, I get it.
They call that the field. In fact, you know, this, I'll read this out because this is straight out of, and people say, oh, but it's been debunked. It isn't. This is what's going on in the quantum reality. In physics, ether, also known as ether theories, propose the existence of a medium, a space-filling substance or field, as a transmission medium for the propagation of electromagnetic and gravitational forces. This is where quantum science is right now.
Right, and information, exactly.
Yep, and the theories of Einstein are being now challenged and debunked because he didn't have the missing component, which was the field.
Right.
So isn't that interesting that in science they're now grappling with this very issue of actually, oh my goodness, there's not just mass, there's not just force, there's actually something else going on here. It's called the field. Ophiuchus is the field. Ophiuchus represents the emergence of the field, which ultimately everything exists because of the field. And in the field is what we then juxtapose. This is how we've got to the debunking versus the proving it to us, is that if Ophiuchus is the womb of creation, Ophiuchus is the field. And the reason that astrologers remove her is because it doesn't fit in neatly. You see, the whole 12 system is to do with polarity, and I'm pushing into the spiritual now. This, again, is the cognitive dissonance, as we're trying to break out of the idea of polarity, either this or that. So the entire 12 sign system is based on polarity. Gemini is opposite Sagittarius. Scorpio is opposite Taurus. Cancer is opposite Capricorn. Leo is opposite Aquarius. Virgo is opposite to Pisces. And you go around and there's just this nice, neat polarity. So you can either be this or this. But then you bust through the middle and you put this 13th sign in there and you go, oh my God, that whole thing of polarity begins to collapse. Well, that's the idea of the ether. When you then look at, and I know that this is a controversial thing to say, but symbols have been absolutely destroyed by the Cabal.
Yes.
They have taken divine symbols or sacred geometry, like the five-sided star, the pentagram, and you look at tarot, you will know that the devil card, he has Baphomet's it's all about that pentacle. But you look at pentacles in the tarot, pentacles is manifestation, yeah?
Yes.
How does it happen without that fifth energy? That fifth energy is Ophiuchus. And in the astrological structure, the reason that 12 sign astrologers struggle to integrate her into this, we don't, is that Ophiuchus actually goes with every single sign. You can put ether behind any of those polarities and you will find the magic behind it. This is the divine feminine energy. The last piece I'll say about the debunkers, again, everything I say can be tested and proven and investigated and looked at for anyone who wants to go have a look. We've established that the sun does move through Ophiuchus. We've established personally that Sana said her rising sign's in Scorpio, but she's also got, you know, if you put a 13 overlay in a 12 system, what it means is that somewhere along the line, you've got one of those houses actually has multiple energies, because 13 divided by 12 doesn't work, right? So one of your houses in a 13 sign astrology system, like yours, your first house is actually divided. So Sana, for example, now with Ophiuchus, actually is not just a Scorpio rising, she's actually a Ophiuchus rising as well. So the energy you can actually see, and we use this to deal with sometimes when the Scorpio, you go very deep emotionally. It can lead to, if it's left if you just leave a lot of Scorpio energy can actually make you crazy because you go so deep. And it can lead to those really dark experiences. But when you then think about moving that energy, i.e. the sun's moving, the moon's moving, everything moves. It doesn't just stay there. To have, in this case, Ophiuchus also sitting right alongside, it means that the experience then comes out of that and changes. And if you insert this Ophiuchus energy into the movement of, you know, the houses and the sun and the planets around the chart, you'll actually find that that's where, for each individual, this is where the divine feminine is coming in, right? That if it's in the third house, it'll be in that house of childhood. If it's in the fourth house, it'll be coming in through the kind of what we call the lineage and roots. If it's in the fifth house, it'll be coming in through creativity. If it's in the sixth house, it'll be coming in through work and well-being. If it's in the seventh house, it'll be manifesting. This divine feminine energy will be manifesting in your relationships, which for me is where it is. The eighth house, it'll come in. Each of those houses has its own kind of characteristics. And if you insert the Ophiuchian energy in there, suddenly you have access to this divine feminine intelligence. This is this right brain, this opening. This is where you have innovation. This is where you have incredible insight. This is how we're going to break out of the matrix. Our vision is to bring together a community. There's so many Ophiuchians in the world right now. They don't know it. They think they're Scorpios or they think they're something else. And the world is crying out for these highly refined solutions, insights, and inventions for restoration. And it's the divine feminine energies. If we want to ignite 1 million, we want to find 1 million Ophiuchians and ignite them. That's our vision for this. Because we believe with the Maharishi principle, you only need 0.001% to come alive. And suddenly this whole system will absolutely begin to implode. And because the divine feminine energy is beyond anything of the mice and men thinking, the silly little men thinking in the Roman Empire that, well, that they were fearing the divine feminine. They pushed her out because they didn't want to know. And you go all the way back into history and you will find that the divine feminine, it was witches at the stake. It was the pagan rituals. It was the people who had that right brain intuitive in sync with Mother Gaia, in sync with the field. They just knew. And no wonder these silly little men running around in the Greco-Roman, which is still established today. They're saying, well, we don't want to know about any of that. But yet, in quantum science, they are now confronting the reality of Einstein was wrong because he didn't understand the unifying principle of the field. And the field is here, whether we accept it in astrology, whether we accept it in science, whether we accept it in quantum physics and manifestation and everything else. There's a whole episode we could do on gravity and electromagnetism and how that is what creates manifestation. It doesn't work without the field. So that's what we would say about that to the debunkers.
Oh my goodness, this is marvelous. So yeah, Einstein, he said, let me just go find a constant to fill in this number I don't know, right? So I'm a believer. It's beautiful. Oh my goodness, I'm mind blown. I love the divine feminine. I am one, and I know I was burned at the stake in other parallel lives, perhaps. Certainly, I want to let the rest of this time let you speak about anything else you'd like to speak on, and also tell us about how we can find you and what you're up to.
It's up to me now.
Well, yeah.
You're both delightful. I like you. I like you, David. I know I like Sana.
I like him too.
Huh.
Well, I'll just reiterate that people that are on the path of wanting to step into the 5D reality, breaking free of the matrix, we're looking for different ways of getting there, whether that is a meditation practice, whether that is yoga practice, whether that is tarot, regression sessions, all that kind of stuff. We're all doing the best that we can with the tools that we have. And, people will be watching this and they truly love their astrological chart using the 12 sign system. And I hope that by what we've shared so far, that if you were to embrace the true position of the planetary bodies, you could do a quantum leap in stepping into that 5D reality. And it might be uncomfortable because your cup unconsciously could be very close to full. But by taking the step to be open to the possibility of something different, you have no idea what kind of impact that could have on your life. You could become just free of the shackles that unconsciously kept you in a place that you weren't comfortable. So we do private readings that are 2 hours long, that are recorded, and we mainly focus at the moment at the planetary bodies that we all know, especially that golden triangle of the sun, the moon, and the rising sign, and any aspects that they make, because it's not just where they are, it's also the angles that they make with other things in your chart. For example, is Saturn opposite your sun, or is it a trine, or anything along those lines? We also look at your north and south node, which is very strong in Vedic astrology. Maybe David will talk about that. We also we look at the Lilith asteroid. And again, this is something different from what a lot of other astrologers use. They look at Lilith, and there is a Lilith asteroid, so a physical thing in the sky, and then there is this fictional Lilith black moon energy, and it's all like it's not an actual thing in the sky. So we use the asteroid versus what some other astrologers use. So that is our typical reading with Venus and Saturn and that. But there is so much more that David briefly touched on. There is Juno. Juno, we've spoke about that in one of our recent blogs. Juno is who is your true opposite partner in this lifetime. So not just the relationship, the love aspect that is found in Venus, but Juno takes that to another level. We look at Pallas Athena, the strategist, but also she was the war queen. She was an equal among the deities in the Greco-Roman mythology. We look at Vesta, we look at Ceres. Ceres, the embodiment of Mother Earth. I've got goosebumps talking about them. We talk about Setna, who is very similar to Ceres, but Setna instead is of the ocean life, the oceans. She's the protector of that life, and that would take things to a whole other level. And there is so much more. We've talked about in our blog several times about Icarus. Icarus is that risk-taking, the myth of Icarus. He was freed by his father with the wings, and the father said, don't go too close to the sun. But Icarus didn't listen. He went too close, the wax melted, and he plunged to his death in the sea. So that's about risk-taking. So there's, apart from the normal natal planets that most astrologers will talk about, you know about Pluto. For us, Pluto is a feminine energy. We talk about Neptune. So the normal planets that everyone would have heard of that has a slight affinity with astrology, but we would like to then, after an initial reading, looking at that, if you want to know more, then we talk about other things. So we have, it's not just our knowledge, it's not just the knowledge that David has, but there is so much more that we can use as this recipe book that I spoke about earlier to really get closer to understand the divine design. And the gift you can, if you are a parent, the gift you can give yourself by understanding your children. I understand my children so much more. My daughter, having her sun in Aries, she is this fire, and it's just, it just explodes, and it's so foreign to me. I don't have a fire. Yes, Sagittarius is part of my first house as well. My sun is in earth, my moon is in air. I don't do that fire explosion. So for me to understand that she has that, and that's just the way she is, right? So if you were to guide your children better, I think understanding where they're at, their tendencies of how they deal with emotions. Do they deal with emotions by thinking through them and quite rational and not being too hung up on it? Or do they really feel them, that water? Or does it sit in their body and it actually, it physically holds them down? So at the moment we do private readings that can be booked online, and we provide, in my opinion, a beautiful new moon and full moon blog every 2 weeks that we put on YouTube and recently on Spotify as well. There is so much knowledge, not just about the position of the sun or the moon at that time, but David explained a lot about the ego consciousness at this lunar eclipse that we had earlier in the week, because it was a penumbral eclipse, which means that the moon was in the shadow of the earth. So working on our shadow work is such a beautiful time to do that. And so by understanding, by knowing where the planetary bodies are at a particular time, you can then accelerate any kind of quantum leap you would want to do. Is it a time to let go of shadow work? Is it a time to, it's using it to your advantage? And why not use the true position rather than having it fit nicely in a 30 degrees times 12, 360 degrees circle?
Amazing.
Oh, yes.
Amazing. David, last words?
Yeah, so just bridging from that this to me is the organic versus the inorganic. This is the overlay, the matrix overlay is the 12 sign. So, this new lunar eclipse that's just happened in the last few days is an incredible time to wrap up, deal with shadow work. And because that is what a penumbral eclipse is all about, as Sana has just said. However, if following, that's the organic, that is the reality. The reality is that we've just had a penumbral eclipse in Virgo. It doesn't matter what the 12 sign overlay says. Where was it? It probably was in Libra. So if somebody's looking at that going, oh, well, it's a penumbral eclipse in Libra, their experience of that, which is an air sign, is totally different from Virgo, which is get into the detail. You need to understand the detail a little bit of the shadow. What is it? That's why our last blog, I went to great lengths to actually to go back and deconstruct and say, what is this ego identity and this ego consciousness? It exists in and of itself, and we all recognize it, even if we don't articulate that we recognize it. But we've all had those experiences of, oh, that person's really egotistical. That person's really stuck in their ego. We've all got to go through the process of integrating, not, touching on the Vedic, they talk about the dissolution of the ego. I don't quite accept that as part of the process of evolution. I think that it's integration of the ego, and the ego consciousness is actually related to the third house of Gemini, where we, as I said before, where we first formed our beliefs. And that is where, when you look at psychology, and they say, well, actually, if you sit down and say, I need to do some work on myself, I need to break through my limitations, I need to be more effective, I've got some self-sabotage in my life. What is a psychologist, or as you say, you're coaching, I've no doubt you do this as well, you'll take people back to that early experiences, because where did those beliefs start? So this penumbral eclipse in Virgo is actually very suited. See, Virgo is ruled by Gemini.
Mercury.
Mercury, well, it's the whole Gemini energy. So Mercury is the ruler of the third house. So if you're following 13 sign astrology, right now, is the perfect time to organically align with the idea of some childhood regression, some past life regression, some understanding my belief structures. And you're aligning with the tailwind of the organic energy that's already there. It's saying, now's the time. Whereas over here on the 12 sign, because they've got ahead of themselves, they are experiencing this completely differently. What I would also conclude with here, which is very important as we've experienced this, is that right now when we talk about the matrix structure, there are 3 major astrological events that have taken place in the last 6 months that in the 12 sign system, people have utterly and completely missed. These are game changers. The first was the entry of Pluto into Capricorn, yeah? Pluto just entered into Capricorn. Now, when Pluto goes all the way around all of the constellations, and we believe it's a feminine energy, again, here you go, the feminine energy of Pluto takes 250 years. So if you go back around 250 years, where was Pluto? When was the last time Pluto was at this exact point in 13 sign astrology, not 12 sign, where they've utterly missed this. This is just completely explodes the mind and the reality of seeing what's actually going on. I'm not a religious man, I'll make that statement, but there is a verse in the Bible that says there will be signs in the sky. I think it's in Luke. There will be signs in the sky. Isn't that source saying to us, hey, take a look at what's going on up there, because that's the organic. That's what's happening. Now let's just skip back 247. It was 247, 248, but basically 250s. It's not exactly precise. But what happened the last time Pluto was at this point in the 13th sign? 3 things happened that we are today looking to unravel. It was 1776 was the year. Those who live in the United States will recognize 1776 immediately because of the Declaration of Independence. That was one event. That was, this can be argued, but let's just go with this for a moment. This was the birth of the new Roman Empire, the United States of America.
It was.
Right, number 1, that happened the last time Pluto was at this point. Number 2, Adam Smith released a book called The Wealth of Nations. Interesting, Adam, first name, first seed, very interesting. Let's just explore this just for a moment as we wrap this up. Adam Smith writes The Wealth of Nations. The Wealth of Nations is the basis of the economic system we live in today. This is the basis of trade. This is the basis of what they call comparative and competitive advantage between nations. This is the basis.
Colonization, yeah.
Yeah, colonization, modern monetary theory, central banking hegemony. It is the basis of the economic system 100%. If you have studied economics, which I have at a master's level, you will know that Adam Smith and the invisible hand of the market is absolutely the basis of the economic system. So number 1, 1776, he released a book called The Wealth of Nations. The arc of the economic system right now, it's imploding. 1776, Declaration of Independence, the birth of the United States. And look at what's going on with the United States. Is this the end of the modern Roman Empire? Is this where we all go back to the founding fathers and say, hang on, we need to have a look at this again? There's so much going on around that 1776. Well, here's the third piece. This to us, you miss if you are following the 12th sign, and this is where we'll leave this, because it's just so profound. The third pillar that happened in 1776 when Pluto was at this exact point in the 13 sign chart was the birth of the Bavarian Illuminati Party.
That's
Fact.
right.
Adam Weishaupt and Adam Smith. Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations. Adam Weishaupt formed the Bavarian Illuminati political party. Fact. Which has then become the order. And the idea of that Bavarian Illuminati party in 1776, interesting, that was Adam Weishaupt, Adam Smith. What I believe is the 3 pillars of the matrix is that the order is the shadow government. We've got the modern monetary theory and colonialism and trade and capital markets, which is Adam Smith's invisible hand, which isn't working, by the way, and the birth of America. You take all 3 of those things right now and you ask yourself, what on earth is going on in the world right now in all 3 of those areas? And Pluto's arrival is a clarion call from source in our view.
But we have an opportunity to recreate all of that in this time.
Absolutely.
And Capricorn is ruled by.
And Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. And Saturn is the devil in the tarot, Baphomet, sitting on the black box with the 2 chains coiled around, and humanity thinks that she is captured, but is not.
You can take the chains off on the cards, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why I love the tarot as well. I often, when we do our readings and preparation, well, I always look at the tarot. I always look at the numerology. I look at those 3 and I go, if it's all, sometimes it doesn't align, but a lot of the times it does. Now, Saturn, this is what's been missed. Saturn has entered Aquarius. Saturn is now in Aquarius. And that is absolutely profound, because when you go back to 1964 to 1966, which is where I started, and I'm drawing a loop all the way back. 1964 to 1966, Saturn was in this exact position of where he is in the sky right now in Aquarius. What happened in 1964 and 1966? We had the dawning of the age of Aquarius.
Mhm.
That song came into reality.
And
What
so
else
died in
happened?
1963. Yep.
Yep. What else happened
What?
through that whole period of the mid-60s through to the
Yep.
beginning of the end of 60s? It is incredible historically what happened. The last piece of this is Walter Cronkite and the mainstream media. In
Yes.
1968, just after this process had begun,
Yes.
Cronkite, who was the template for the modern news, the anchor, the learned anchor, the man sitting there bringing us the news. I don't know this, I know this from historical fact, but he challenged the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And we know that the 60s was a time of tumultuous, absolute revolution. That was the beginning of the age of Aquarius. That was the first run at how the world will upend the matrix.
And the cabal did take it back over, though. It did take it back over,
Yep.
but you're absolutely right. I have something else to add to you guys.
Boom.
The first pillar you mentioned in our revolution in this country, we had another Adam. It was John Adams, who was part of the Revolutionary War, and he's one of our presidents. So you got 3 Adams. In this case,
Wow.
last name, but you can add that to your
Yeah.
story. Oh my gosh.
So
I'm
here's the thing.
mind
Yeah.
blown.
If you're in the 12 sign inorganic overlay, you are utterly and completely missing all of this.
Yes.
Yet here we are, we're playing, and you, Liz, and everyone else, and we're reaching out to the tribe right now, and you're saying, if you're an offer, you can. If you want to be part of this restoration, if you want to be part of what happened, we saw the first examples of it in the 60s. Well, those of us who were born at that time are now growing up, and the baton has been handed to us.
Yes.
Saturn is just in that same point. We're at the exact same point. And if you then look at the third piece of this, which is being missed, which is Neptune, has just entered Pisces. So we've got Neptune has come 162 years round to this profound. So those of us living today are experiencing events that didn't happen. Pluto 250 years ago. We may have been born then and have actually been reincarnated now. There's another thing to consider. Some of us were born, could have been born last time Neptune was here at 0 degrees Pisces, which is profound, and have come back in now 162 yees later. There are people who could have passed through the 60s who went through that experience, and they've now said, oh, now is the time to come back. And they bring all of that past life experience of having gone through the first round of the revolution to now. And I reckon there's kids coming in now who were alive at that time. There were kids coming in now who were alive in 1776, and they're here. And they're saying, we're part of this. So you miss it. If you're not on the 13 sign, you're missing it. It's gone. People have raced off down. No, get aligned with what's actually happening in the organic system, not the inorganic overlay. Let's go back to the organic. You can't get, if you want the root of everything, it's source consciousness, right? That's what's happening. Ignore it. It's fine.
Oh my
Embrace
goodness,
it.
we could talk for hours.
Wow.
I need a drink, actually. No, but I mean, I want to close this out, but this has been wonderful. This has been wonderful. I'm going to, any final words? I'm going to make sure I have all your information in the description box, and I'm also going to put up the dates of all the 13 signs. We'll make sure we have all that in the description box. So,
Sure thing. So you can, our social media presence is Star Kittens Media. So you can find us on Facebook. We have
Nice.
an active channel on Telegram. We have our YouTube channel
yes.
and on Spotify. Yes.
Oh my gosh, guys, thank you so much. I'm going to take us off
Thank
record.
you.
Oh my goodness. Stay with me just a minute. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us.